The following presentation was recorded at the 2012 SouthEast LinuxFest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is licensed under a Creative Commons license. For more information about the SouthEast LinuxFest, visit www.southeastlinuxfest.org. The SouthEast LinuxFest would like to thank the following diamond sponsors in 2012 for helping make these videos possible.
Let's see. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to SouthEast LinuxFest. This morning's speaker is Ruth Suehle. She works for Red Hat as Community Marketing Manager, and she also writes on opensource.com.
Thanks. Well, thanks. How many of you are familiar with opensource.com? Wow, am I loud only to me? Okay. OpenSource.com is a site that we launched at Red Hat about 2 years ago to talk about how those principles that make open source successful for software development can work in other ways. And we set it up as a way to let people have an opportunity to explain what they do in software to the people who don't work on software, and as a way to show how those principles are effective for so much beyond software. This is what the site looks like, or at least this is what the site looks like on January 18th. As you can see, we split the content into several channels, just like your daily newspaper: business, education, government, health, law, and life is sort of the catch-all channel for anything that didn't fit into one of those other categories. And this is the problem. How do you explain open source without talking about software? Because as soon as you say those words, open source, people immediately jump to software. So you start thinking of examples. And the easiest example most people think of for collaboration and this idea of working together is a wiki. And there are several sites where you can set up a wiki for anything. This is the Lost Wiki, and this is where somebody who had a lot more time than I did spent a lot of time examining that blast door map from Lost. But then your friend who you're trying to explain open source to says, but wait a minute. I remember one time that Conan O'Brien was on Stephen Colbert's show, and he said, you know what I can do? I can tell your fans to go to the internet and write on Wikipedia that Conan O'Brien was arrested for clubbing sea turtles with canoe paddles. And that's exactly what happened. They got on the internet and edited Wikipedia to say just that. So now your friend, not so much convinced about this whole open source thing and the wikis and their effectiveness. So you need a new way to explain it. And the solution I came up with is this common language we all have of pop culture. You can find something that you both have in common, something you both like, and explain these principles of open source using those pop culture references. All art is derivative, and that's what open source comes down to, is collaboration and building on the things that came before you. So Hunter S. Thompson retyped The Great Gatsby and A Farewell to Arms just to see what it felt like to write the Great American Novel before he wrote any of his own. 10 Things I Hate About You, fun movie with Heath Ledger. It's really just Kiss Me Kate, which is really just Taming of the Shrew. The Lion King is what happens if Hamlet lives in the jungle instead of Denmark. The evolution of art, absolutely derivative. Everything builds on the past. Impressionism was built on post-impressionism. Upon that, we got Cubism. After that, Dada, Surrealism, pop art, and minimalism. So what I'm saying, Impressionism led to that. Internet culture, all derivative. I like turtles, kid. One video goes up on the internet, and if you haven't seen this little guy, he's interviewed on his local news about what he thinks of this festival, and he's in his zombie makeup. And his entire answer is to look into the camera and go, I like turtles. And that spawned an entire sea of derivative art about this one little guy. Everything that you love on Reddit and 4chan is derivative work. And particularly, I love Giorgio's here. He has his own Facebook page for his hair. TV, movies, music, video games, even memes, even lolcats, all derivative works. And they're all things that you can use to explain what open source means to people who don't yet understand. These are the principles that I talk about now instead of open source, because as soon as you say the words open source, like I said, people immediately jump to software. And if you're trying to explain something outside of software, that's not going to help you. So instead, I talk about the principles that we really mean when we say the open source way or open source principles. So I'm going to go through a few of these and give you examples that you can work from, and then you can build upon that. And I'm going to tell you some other ways, not necessarily pop culture related, that are how these principles are working to make the world a better place. So first, sharing. Simple sharing. How many of you saw Tron, the new one? This is basically an open source story, and we can get into the finer detail of whether stealing your own company's code and releasing to the internet is sharing, but the entire plot of the movie is about releasing a program from the grid. This is entirely an open source story. It's also a Disney movie, which we'll get back to in a minute. On your left here, we have Kurt Smith from Tears for Fears. His new work is all released Creative Commons. And he said something really interesting about sharing on his blog. He wrote, "If we," by which he means he and his new partner, a woman named Zoe, had used a label, it would hamper our ability to collaborate. Without the digital marketplace, I would have released no singles. Without Creative Commons, I would have spent a fortune on lawyers fighting against inadvertent copyright. I'd rather celebrate the opportunities that technology gives us, and meanwhile, I'm working on my next album." Brad Sucks, the one on the right, terrible name, I think, but a great guy who also releases all of his work Creative Commons. And if you haven't heard any of his music, he did all of the default sounds in Pidgin. He tours with Jonathan Coulton and Paul and Storm, and who also have done some great open source work. But in bigger names, we have Ghost. Who downloaded this? This was Nine Inch Nails' first album after their split from Interscope Records. And the entire marketing push, if it even was one beforehand, was Trent Reznor posted on their website the words 2 weeks before it was released. That was it. No album coming out, no hey new music, just 2 weeks. They released it Creative Commons, or released it on their website. There were a variety of choices for how you acquired this music, from free all the way up to a $300 special edition box set deal. In the first week, it cost Trent Reznor $20,000 in site upgrades because of the traffic. But in that same week, he made $1.6 million off of it. That $300 box set sold out in the first 30 hours. So clearly, your friend who says that this whole Creative Commons sending my music out there isn't profitable is wrong. Now this is the part where we wake up because it's early in the morning. How many works entered the public domain this year? If anything is going to enter the public domain in a given year, it does so on January 1st, regardless of when it was actually published. So 2012, how many things in the public domain? 0, not one. When, smarty pants, will something enter the public domain again in the United States? 2019, you're actually a pessimistic person, aren't you? 2019, nothing will enter the public domain in the US again because of the changes that we have imposed on copyright law and the ways that we have prevented people from sharing into the public domain. Originally, copyright lasted 14 years. You could opt in for another 14 years, and after you're 28, you were out. And most people didn't renew. 85% of the books written in 1983, 93% of the works overall would have entered the public domain this year, except for the things that we have done to change copyright law. 95 years, sort of an estimate, because it's actually a vast chart that you can consult for when something will actually enter the public domain, but suffice it to say, if you create something, it's not going to be in your lifetime. And at the bottom, I have a list of a few things that would have entered the public domain this year that you won't be seeing. I'm sure there's absolutely nothing Elvis or Tolkien-like that you've ever heard of or would be interested in seeing derivative works of. New versions, Braille options. This is a problem for accessibility because of what you have to go through in order to release something in a new format. But of course, the public domain is highly useful because many of your favorite Disney movies have come off of public domain stories. And in fact, when I started to create this list, I had a much harder time thinking of Disney movies that weren't based on public domain works. But if you remember back, we had that Tron story in the beginning. That's a Disney movie that's all about an open source story, kind of playing at both sides. But the first copyright battle was not about Disney. It was long before Disney. And if you took any sort of copyright-related class in college, you probably learned that the first copyright came out of the Statute of Anne in 1710. But about a year ago, I learned that there was actually a much, much older story in the 6th century with this group called the 12 Apostles of Ireland. And they lived in this abbey under St. Finian. And St. Columba was one of these 12 apostles of Ireland who lived with St. Finian. And St. Columba had one mission in life that's going to sound very familiar to those of you who like to work in Creative Commons. He just wanted to share. He wanted to share books. And that was a lot harder in the 6th century. So he spent his entire life copying books laboriously by hand, literally up until the day he died. He took one of St. Finian's books from his library, copied it, and wanted to share it with the world, except that's how St. Finian found out that he had stolen his book. And in Finian's opinion, and what he told the court and the king, was that every copy of an original book belonged to the original owner. And thus he told St. Columba, "You'd better hand over my book." They went to the king, who happened to be Columba's cousin, didn't help him at all. Columba was exiled for it. And unlike today, when you share MP3s, 3,000 people died over this issue. Fortunately, things have changed a little bit. Nobody's going to die if you go download some MP3s. The Center for the Public Domain at Duke University has created one, and this is a half, it's not quite released yet, graphic novels about the history of copyright. The first one was called Bound by Law. It's a general history of copyright, and they're written for the layman, and they're done as graphic novels so that they're more accessible. So if you'd like to explain those concepts to somebody, these are a great way to do it. And of course, they're Creative Commons licensed. You can go download them. This one has been held up a bit because the artist died halfway through, which is really unfortunate. He was a great guy. But it's called Theft, A History of Music, and it's all about the history of copyright issues in music. And it goes all the way back to Plato, who said that any musical innovation is in full danger of the state and ought to be prohibited, which I summarize as Plato was against YouTube mashups long before he ever would have found out that YouTube existed. And it goes all the way through that history, runs up to even one of my favorite cases, which was when NWA sampled, lowered the pitch of, and looped 2 notes out of a Funkadelic song. Funkadelic took them to court, and NWA lost. The court said that you can't sample. Sampling this is too much. And they said, well, it's 2 notes. And I have listened to these 2 samples over and over again. I assure you, I can't hear it. It's 2 notes, lowered the pitch, looped. It's impossible to hear that these are the same. And so they asked the court, well, what would be de minimis? And de minimis is the legal term for so little that it doesn't count here. And the court said as little as 1 note would be too much. How many of you read Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality? Oh, this is the part of my talk where I start your list of homework, so you can start writing things down. This is the first one. Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality is fan fiction. Come along with me. It's the only piece of fan fiction I've ever read, and I have read 76 chapters of this so far. I think they're up to 90-something chapters. It's unfinished, it's continuing. What makes this relevant is the author starts each chapter with some sort of disclaimer to J.K. Rowling, sort of, these are J.K. Rowling's characters, I don't mean any harm, blah, blah, blah. On chapter 22, somebody informed the author that J.K. Rowling doesn't actually care. She's totally fine with fan fiction. She's totally okay with you using her characters and using her settings and creating new things, as long as you don't put them in age-inappropriate situations, because she doesn't want people Googling Harry and Ron and getting things that 11-year-olds shouldn't read about. But the reason that you should read it beyond that is because it's a lot of fun. What this story is based on is it's that Harry was not raised by an evil and angry uncle. It's that he was raised by a very loving one who was very smart. And he was an Oxford professor and gave Harry tons and tons of textbooks. And when Harry gets to Hogwarts, he's actually really, really good at science. And when McGonagall turns into a cat for the first time, he goes, you can't do that. That violates all kinds of laws of physics. That's not okay. And they say, what's physics? And Harry realizes if he can master science and master magic, he can kind of take over the world. The quantified self is a really great movement in sharing that really is improving life for a lot of people. It's based on 2 things. One, the emergence of a lot of things like the Fitbit, these little devices that will track all sorts of things about your heart rate and how much you've walked and even how much REM sleep you got in the night. Tons and tons of these little devices coming out every day, along with websites where you can share this data. And of course, there are privacy concerns there, and you can, on any given website, read what they're doing to assuage your concerns. But the benefits are really quite impressive. And one of the first was this site called Cure Together that was able to prove a link between asthma and infertility that traditional research had never been able to prove. It was an assumed link, it was suspected, but it had not been proved. And when everyone on this site came together and uploaded their aggregate data, it was shown and reproven a year later with about 10 times as many people. And now this is happening over and over again. What's really interesting, if you go to, I think it's quantifiedself.com, these are their 3 prime questions when it comes to sharing your information. And I think that there's a big link between that set of 3 questions and the open source community. Because when it comes to sharing, what we want to know is what you did, how you did it, and what did you get out of it? And how can I build on that? And in this case, the how can I build on that is what can we learn about health so that we can help more people? Next principle is transparency. And if you think of just about any sort of romance novel that your friend you'd like to explain to likes, or TV show or movie, it's going to involve a conflict between 2 characters. And in those cases of romance novels, it's almost certainly a lack of someone not being as transparent as they could with the other person. But I'll talk about transparency in government first. This is a map of Panem, which is the country in the Hunger Games. So who's read the book? Not seen the movie, but read the book. Okay, which ones of you only saw the movie? And now you're going to go read the books. So to explain, because a lot of you are clearly unfamiliar, this is set in this dystopian future, and way over on that side you see the sea. That is the capital. In this future, the capital is where all of the money is. And it's 74 years in the past, these districts that are spread across the country rose up to fight against the capital. To prove to them that they could never win again, because they lost, the capital set up this thing called the Hunger Games. And the Hunger Games is once a year where children between the ages of 11 and 18, 1 boy and 1 girl from each district, are sent into a battle to the death. 1 child emerges. And if you read through the set of 3 books, by the end, this is the most glowing example of lack of transparency in government you will ever read. But this is the real-life example of transparency in government. This is the 2 pictures of the Reichstag dome in Berlin. And it was intentionally built as an example of transparency in government and to reflect transparency. You can see the bottom where these people are looking down. They literally looked down into Parliament, and it was designed this way so that the people would always be above their government and be able to see what was happening. A more fun note, Twitter, probably 18 months ago, I started to notice the sorts of interactions that I was having with companies on Twitter and how differently different companies were treating the way that they tweeted. And there's a big spectrum from very, very wrong to very, very right. And it's a really interesting glimpse into how companies treat their customers and perhaps how internet savvy they are, and sort of a transparent veil into their customer service. So the airlines are one of my prime examples of who's doing it very right. JetBlue, you can actually reschedule canceled flights through their Twitter account. I had a really great experience on Delta where, well, the bad experience was that they had lost my luggage, but by tweeting Delta Assist, they managed to find a completely unlabeled piece of luggage in Orlando and get it to Vancouver, even though I had flown to Seattle overnight. Southwest has done some really fun things, like they'll tweet pictures of, there was a Southwest customer proposed in an airport involving a monkey, which I'm pretty sure is against some sort of TSA guideline, and I don't know how that happened, but Southwest was there to tweet it. Subway is my example of who's doing it really, really wrong, on top of other things they're doing really, really wrong. Because Subway doesn't tweet anything except some variation on, here's the $5 footlong of the week. They don't interact with their customers at all. And that's the important thing about being transparent with your customers, is that you actually say, talk to them. And my problem with Subway is that I have a serious weakness for Italian urban cheese bread. It's really delicious, and so I find myself going back to Subway over and over. And I noticed one day all of their napkins and all of their cups say, please recycle me, recycle this napkin, recycle all of our stuff. Except then I looked around and Subway doesn't offer recycling bins, and that's kind of a problem. So I've tweeted at Subway a couple of times, but they don't respond to anybody. It's not personal. I'm hoping one day they figure out both Twitter and recycling. Eventbrite, though, is the one that really made me first notice how companies were using Twitter. And the reason that they're doing it really, really well is because a lot of people track who's talking at them on Twitter, who has tweeted at Eventbrite. I mentioned Eventbrite in passing and had a question that was related to how to use their stuff. I was going to the South by Southwest Festival. And if you've ever been there, you get tons and tons of party invitations, and they're all through Eventbrite. But Eventbrite has you print out this little ticket sort of thing. It's a full sheet of paper. And I had, say, 10 party invitations from Eventbrite per night times 7 nights. That's a whole lot of little pieces of paper to carry to Austin and carry around every night. And so I had tweeted, am I really supposed to carry all these around? And nobody, I used the South by hashtag. Nobody responded to that, but Eventbrite was looking for people who had used their name at all, and Eventbrite was the ones who helped me. Next, we'll talk about meritocracy. Reality TV, theoretically a meritocracy. We can debate about how many of them are staged, but that's the base concept of how reality TV works. We get a group of people together, and the best one wins. But I think Lost is actually a better example if you ignore about 3.5 seasons worth and focus on the first episode. If you watched Lost, what happens is this plane crashes on an island, and you realize that even if you watched that when it first aired, you kind of knew what this show was going to be about. It was going to be about these people stranded on an island. But they didn't know that when they landed. And what happens is everybody's running around, flaming airplane. A couple of people are just sitting on the beach bawling. That guy, Jack, he becomes the leader, at least for that first half a season that I mentioned. Because he was the one who rose up and put out the effort to help, he's the one who became the leader of the group. And as the show progresses, that changes. The people who are active and the people who are functioning in this meritocracy, because what else do you have on an island of castaways, are the ones who become the leaders. But Star Trek is my favorite example of what a functioning meritocracy really is, because they don't care not only what your race is, they don't care what your species is. And there's an entire episode in The Next Generation where they don't even care if you actually have flesh and blood. There's a whole episode where Data is put on trial. His sentience is put on trial. Data is the android. And Starfleet comes and tries to take Data away from the Enterprise because they say he's property. He's essentially a computer. He belongs to us, and we can dismantle him if we want to. And his crew comes up and says, no, he's a person. He's one of us. And the way the meritocracy functions is that as long as you can do your job, as long as you are good at what you're there for, then you're there to do it, even if you happen to be made of computer bits in a neural network. But sometimes the meritocracy fails and you're punished. Sometimes a higher being comes along and puts you on trial. And I had a third slide there that apparently was deleted. So we'll skip ahead to rapid prototyping. And my favorite example in all of this, the classic example of rapid prototyping is Iron Man. Iron Man was based on Howard Hughes, who is an inventor and a little bit crazy, which probably describes everybody you know in any open source community. Iron Man was faced with a problem. Well, Tony Stark was faced with a problem before he became Iron Man. And he rapidly prototyped this hacked-together solution to fix it. Depending on which origin story or movie you're watching, the basic story is the same. Problem, built a solution. Came home, refined the solution, built a better suit, built 5 or 7 or 10 more better suits. Those plans were taken by his enemies, who then used them against him. It's exactly how open source software communities work. Not only that, Iron Man uses KDE inside his suit. This is from Amazing Iron Man 11. Kickstarter, functioning meritocracy outside of Iron Man. Diaspora was at its time, when it went on Kickstarter, the most successful Kickstarter project ever. But the way a meritocracy works is you might be leading today, but if you don't sustain that leadership, you're not going to be winning tomorrow. And that's what's happened to Diaspora. Is anybody using Diaspora? How many of you had accounts? Wow, 2, 3, 4 of us. When was the last time you checked it? Yeah, it's not winning anymore. But these others, absolutely. MuseOpen is an open source music project that is all about releasing into the open. And so not only were they built on this meritocracy of Kickstarter, but their entire purpose is for the freedom of music. Punk Mathematics is an open math book built on punk music. These are some of the most successful Kickstarter projects, which oddly often involve iPod docs. Somehow, if you need a Kickstarter project to make $1 million, iPod doc is the way to go. Not sure what's up with that. Finally, community. And all of this eventually comes back to community. And what community really is collaboration. People working together. All of these come back to that. And if you remember what I said about transparency, any plot and any story, there's a conflict. And the conflict is going to involve violating one of these principles. And a lot of times it's going to be community. The other way that you can talk about community is any ensemble cast ever, whether that's the JLA or the Scoobies or another set of Scoobies. Any ensemble cast is going to give you an example of community and collaboration. But I really like the way Love Actually works. Love Actually is a movie with about a half a dozen different plots. And there are several sets of characters. But as the movie progresses, and this maps it out, you discover that the guy in this storyline is the brother of the girl in this storyline. And she's the secretary of the guy over in this storyline. And they all come together. And this is how our communities work. Everybody has a connection somewhere else. And those connections are actually meaningful and important, even if it doesn't look like it on the surface. This is an example of how community comes together to actually do something really important and really effective. After the earthquake in Haiti, this was the available map of Port-au-Prince, because it wasn't profitable for GPS to map Haiti. It wasn't profitable for paper mapping people to go map Haiti, because there was nobody to sell it to. And so this is what emergency responders had to work with. There's nothing on this map that tells you how to get anywhere. There's a map that tells you there's a road. It doesn't tell you the name of it or where the hospital is or anything useful at all. And so OpenStreetMap came in and started mapping. They started mapping not only the roads, but where there were hospitals left, where there were hospitals left with beds, where there was medicine, where there was anything that could help anyone. And that's what they built very, very quickly. With a little more work, it turned into this. And this is what Google Maps looks like today of that same area. This is what they built in a week. And this is Google Maps still today. This is what they were able to use. They mapped, you can see across the top, hospitals, health facilities with beds, where there were hospitals, where there were dispensaries, and where there were not, which was really, really important for the people trying to help Haiti in the days after the earthquake. Now let's talk about gaming, because gaming is increasingly collaborative and community-based. And for a long time, I didn't have a lot to say about Linux gaming except Unreal 2004. And at this point, that's really, really old. But fortunately, things are changing, and they're changing really fast. And so I apologize that some of the next slides are not as up-to-date as they could be. Who's played Glitch? Glitch is an adorable example of collaboration that is not as kid-friendly as that picture looks. So if you just thought, I'm going to go get my 10-year-old to play, that was a bad idea. Glitch is a Flash-based MMO, and there are tons and tons of MMOs. But what's really interesting about Glitch as a community is it is the most helpful community that I have ever seen in gaming. You can go into the global chat, where in a lot of games it would be just spew and spew of offensiveness and blather, and if you asked a question, you would get booted out. Anytime you go into global chat in Glitch, somebody is going to help you. And the game itself, you can play alone, but there are quests that you will never, ever finish without going finding friends in the game to help you. And not just like 1 or 2 or 3 friends who you gave invites to and came into the game. There are ones where you're going to have to find 20 or 50 or 100 friends. There's one of my favorites is called the Glitch Train, and you can follow another person. And so the Glitch Train means you got 20 people to follow you through 3 streets, which is actually kind of a drag on the server. So the quest is really about whether or not you can drag people through 3 streets. It's invite only right now, and I'm sad to say I'm out of invites if anybody thinks this sounds awesome, but they came out of beta and went back in. They've made a ton of changes in the last couple of months, so I have a feeling they're going to release it publicly soon, and I highly recommend it, but not for your 10-year-old. The World of Goo is a great little physics-based game. Let's get some more exercise. Who's played World of Goo? You guys have so much homework to do. World of Goo is based on these little goo balls, little black goo balls, and it's physics-based, and the game is to figure out the physics of the world. And you connect the little goo balls to make bridges and get the goo balls to some pipe that goes somewhere else. What's awesome about World of Goo, it was originally released on Mac and Windows, and people were asking, when's the Linux version? Can we have a Linux version? When the Linux version was released, within the first 2 days, it was 5% of their downloads. They had higher downloads in those 2 days than they have ever had in the history of the game. Proving yet again, market for Linux gamers. Humble Bundles, proving even more the market for Linux gamers, and that there's money in it, which is always the second part, isn't it? And this is one of the ones that I apologize is a bit out of date, because we're currently in the next Humble Bundle. This is Humble Bundle 4. And what this is you can see across the top, those little red banners. The first 5 are games, and the last 2 are where your money goes. So this is pay what you will for those 5 games. $0, you can download it, same as somebody who pays $1,000. And the proceeds go to EFF and Child's Play. Child's Play is a charity for children in gaming. So I like to say what this means is if you pay 0, you hate freedom and children. But they've started adding things into the bundle, bonus games if you're above the average amount paid, and bonuses for this, and they're Android-based ones. And it's incredibly, incredibly successful. Humble Bundle 4, which was the one back in December, sold $2.3 million, 435,000 downloads, and it's only released for a limited amount of time. The biggest donation was 16,000. The second biggest was, I think, 8,500, and it was a donation battle between Minecraft founder Marcus Persson and a group of My Little Pony fans called the Humble Brony Bundle. But back to the Linux gamers, out of that Humble Bundle number 4, and these numbers are accurate throughout every Humble Bundle release so far, even though they fluctuate slightly. The average Windows user paid less than $5. The average Mac user paid about $7.50, and the average Linux user paid $10.45. Those Windows and Mac numbers aren't changing. The Linux one is heading up towards $12. If that's not evidence that Linux users are willing to pay for games on their OS, I don't know what is. And that is what's bringing us to Steam on Linux. Everybody cheer. Yay. OK, 3 of you cheer. That's awesome. So up until about a month ago, this was my picture for Steam Works on Linux. This is Michael Larabelle from Phoronix, which is a site that talks about gaming among many other things. He has always believed that one day Steam, which is this gaming client from Valve Software, would be released for Linux. And this has been going on since, I'm going to say, about 2008. And every time he says it, people will be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But at some point along the way, there was some code leaked, and he's always firmly believed that it would happen. And now, Gabe Newell is the founder of Valve Software. The Linux version of the Steam client has been photographed, it has been seen, and it will be released probably in December by the end of this year. There will be Steam on Linux, and not just, this is Steamworks beer on an N900, so not in that sense. For those who like their gaming more in the old pen and paper sort of version, Dungeons & Dragons is working on their 5th edition. Dungeons & Dragons is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, RPG systems. And there are a lot of rule changes between their 1st edition back in the 60s and their 4th edition that was released a couple years ago. And that 4th edition made a lot of people really mad. It made some big, big changes. And so if you've been playing 3rd edition for a really long time and you got 4th edition, not happy. And if you were if you were really old and went back to the 1st edition, there's so much that's changed. And so in the face of video games taking away a lot of their market, Wizards of the Coast, that now owns Dungeons & Dragons, said, we got to do something. And so they went to the players. They said, we don't exist without you, so you tell us what you want. And so they're using the community of players to unite those 1st edition rules all the way through the 4th edition rules to make the 5th edition. And they've just started the next round of playtesting about a week or 2 ago. And yeah, that's totally a guy in a 20-sided die suit. And if you have no interest at all in gaming, we'll just go all the way to the other side of the spectrum and talk about fashion. Harry Potter, how about that? There's Harry Potter and fashion. Those 2 dresses are not the same. The one over there that you recognize probably as Harry Potter is the wedding dress that Fleur wears when she gets married. This is from several years earlier. It's an Alexander McQueen dress. Alexander McQueen got really, really unhappy about this, and you should remember that in about 2 more minutes. They went to the designer and they said, you stole our dress. Now, fashion design is about as derivative as it gets. If we go back to the beginning when I was talking about how all art is derivative, there are only so many ways to put 2 sleeves on a shirt and 2 legs on a pair of pants and so forth. And there's not a lot of IP protection in fashion. Doesn't stop you from getting really mad when somebody copies your dress. So Alexander McQueen says, hey, you kind of stole our dress. And I assure you, from the back, still, same dress. The Harry Potter designer says, no. These are not the same at all. If you look up here at the top, mine are phoenixes, yours are peacocks. Not the same. But like I said, fashion design, totally derivative, sometimes in really, really obvious ways. Sometimes in more subtle ways. This is also an Alexander McQueen dress that they said explicitly was based on the Joey character from Friends. They designed this dress based on his look. Now Alexander McQueen is professing to their own use of derivative works. But there's a lot fuzzier line here. This is not clearly a copy like the Harry Potter dress was. However, long before that dress incident, there was this Alexander McQueen show, which they said to the media was based on the chess scene in the first Harry Potter movie, where the kids have a live chess fight. To which I say, Alexander McQueen, you cannot have it both ways. Who's read Ready Player One? And for the rest of you, add it to your homework list. Wow. Ready Player One is a really fun book that came out last November, and if you love 80s pop culture, you need to go read it tonight. It's set in, again, a dystopian future, because apparently that's the sort of stories that we write these days. And in that future, there's this place called the Oasis. The Oasis is the equivalent of the internet there, and everything happens there. People live in the Oasis, not physically, of course. They work there, they play there, and there's a whole fiscal system within there. So the main character is incredibly poor and basically can't afford to leave his free school within the Oasis. What makes it a really interesting example is he describes the Oasis as open source. It's sort of in passing near the beginning of the book. He calls the Oasis open source. It could not be less open source. It's corporately owned. There's no public code involved. In fact, a lot of the book is about problems that he would not have if the Oasis were open source. But what it shows to me is that those words are making their way into a wider culture. And I think what he means when he makes that reference in the book is that it's collaborative, it's community-based, it's where people come together and gather to do things. But the Oasis itself, in the sense of code, not open source at all. And if it's any inspiration at all for you to go read this tonight, just in the last week, the author has said that there is an Easter egg in the book, and you can win your own DeLorean tricked out with a flux capacitor if you find it and make your way through the puzzles. So you can go read the book, get you a DeLorean. The future of innovation, and possibly of pop culture, built on open source. This is a MakerBot and a LilyPad Arduino. And one of the most popular things, I think, to print on a MakerBot is tiny Darth Vader heads, which makes it totally relevant to the whole pop culture discussion. But in a wider sense, it's made rapid prototyping accessible to just about anybody. You can buy one or build one for around $1,000, which is exponentially cheaper than what 3D printing has ever cost in the past. And the LilyPad, well, the Arduino in general, is doing that for what you might do with these boards, rapidly prototyping just about anything you can imagine. The LilyPad is a version for wearable electronics. You use conductive thread. And it's resulting in some really interesting projects. The LilyPad was used in this climate dress made by a Danish company called Diffus. And this goes back to the healthcare stuff and how all of this openness can actually change something about how we live. The climate dress is built with the LilyPad Arduino and CO2 sensors and hundreds of tiny LEDs that go up that sparkly pattern across her chest. And it senses the CO2 in the air and changes those patterns depending on the air quality. This is a total prototype, look what we can do. But it's one step in that path of how we can change things with these open devices. And the reason all of that is important for healthcare is probably one of my favorite stories we've told in the 2 years that we've had opensource.com. And that's why all of this open stuff is important and why it matters. And even to someone you know who doesn't understand this whole open source software thing at all, I haven't found anyone yet you can tell this story to who won't go, oh, now I get it. Karen Sandler, who at the time was working for the Software Freedom Law Center, was told that she needed a pacemaker. She had a condition that could potentially lead to sudden cardiac death. And so she went to the pacemaker company and said, I'd like to see the code that is, say, responsible for saving my life. And they said, no, of course. And she said, well, I'll sign an NDA, whatever you need. I just want to see this code. And of course, they said no. The Medical Device Security Center conducted a study. You can go read the whole, I think it's about 170 pages of it, about the safety of these implanted medical devices. And what they found was that with, say, a laptop like this one and a radio antenna, you could intercept and send signals to implanted medical devices, including patient data, which it had never previously occurred to me was stored on grandma's pacemaker. The FDA doesn't review source code unless the company that makes a device asks them to. And once the FDA has approved a device, you cannot contest its safety. That's why openness is important. That's why being able to see this code and see these devices is really important for our future. On a more optimistic note, we can talk about bioprinting. Now, the MakerBot and the RepRap and devices like that are significantly more open than what's available now in 3D bioprinting. But the way this works is each of those blue planes is a layer of biogel, and each of the red dots is a cell for a blood vessel. And the way this works is layer of paper, layer of cells, layer of paper, layer of cells, and in a couple of hours, you have a blood vessel. And in the next, say, 5 years or so, this is going to be available for heart bypass surgery. What makes it really great is that it's made using your cells, and so your body's not going to reject it because it is your own. And they expect that within the next 10 years, this could be used for more advanced stuff, teeth and bones and hearts even. It's not open source yet, but one of the developers at Clemson University who's working on one of these early bioprinters was asked in an interview, so hey, I have a RepRap, could maybe I one day print stuff like this, bioprinting? And he said, the only difference between what I have and what you have is the media that it's printing. So I like to think of this as one day I can print some bacon. What all this means is that one day we'll have no more reboots because we'll just be able to print us up a new William Shatner. We won't have to make a new movie. On the other hand, the downside to being able to print all of that stuff is that George Lucas can print his own Jar Jar. And that about concludes what I have to tell you about Jar Jar and Darth Vader and other assorted open source things. So if you'd like to find more from opensource.com, you can find us on the social media of your choice there. We're open source way on all of them. And I haven't added Pinterest there, but we have a new Pinterest board. And you can find me just about anywhere too. Any questions? All right. Well, that's a question of the license somebody's using and what the artist is asking. So, for example, So basically he's asking what's the, where does openness become fuzzy with piracy? And so saying it depends on the license, it depends on what the artist has said they want, and exactly the framework that something's being done in. So for example, if you were in the bar last night and you passed by that little round table with people laughing uproariously at a card game, that's a really somewhat offensive card game, no, very offensive card game called Cards Against Humanity. It's Creative Commons licensed, and it's really hard to get right now. It's fairly new. So you can go download it and print it yourself. That's cool, they're totally fine with that. You can get on an email list to be alerted when it's going to be available again, and it'll sell out in about 4 minutes. But somebody appears to have downloaded it and printed it and is selling it for almost 100% markup on Amazon. There are artists, I've heard musicians, you're talking about the ghost thing. I heard musicians say, well, you know, if I put it out there, then I don't care whether you get it on my site or if you go download it off of some torrent or what, you know, you're not paying me either way. As long as you're listening to my music, then, you know, maybe you're going to come pay for it in another format later, or my next album, or, you know, whatever they're hoping to get out of that. I've heard others say, really? You pirated it when I was giving it away for free? You could have just come to me and it would have been free? So it really depends heavily on the license and the artist involved. Any other questions? All right, then I'll conclude by inviting you to come by the opensource.com booth that's on the end here by the stairs. You can pick up our open source guide to the zombie apocalypse, which I highly recommend because it turns out that, you know, the zombies are coming now. They're starting in Florida. And he mentioned in my introduction that I'm a community marketing manager now, and we'll be having a Fedora hot dog lunch in the park across the street in about an hour. So if you'd like to join us at 12:30 for Beefy Miracles, I'd love to see you there. I'll be the one in a hot dog suit. Thanks.
When we created Asterisk over a decade ago, we could not have imagined that Asterisk would not only become the most widely adopted open source communication software on the planet, but that it would impact the entire industry in the way that it has. Today, Asterisk has found its way into more than 170 countries and virtually every Fortune 1000 company.
The success of Asterisk has enabled a transition of power from the hands of the traditional proprietary phone vendors into the hands of the users and administrators of phone systems. Using this power, our customers have created all sorts of business-changing applications, from small office phone systems to mission-critical call centers to international carrier networks. In fact, there's even an entire country whose communications infrastructure runs on Asterisk.
Digium has always been about creating technology that expands communications capabilities in ways that we could never have imagined. And that's part of what's game-changing about Digium. Today, we're doing it again, this time by introducing a new family of HD IP phones that extends control of the user all the way to the desktop.
The launch of these new products represents the next phase in Digium's history of innovation. These are the first and only IP phones designed to fully leverage the power of Asterisk. When we first discussed our expectations for building a family of phones for use with Asterisk, our requirements were pretty simple. We asked the team to build the phones such that they were easy to install, integrate, provision, and use. I think you'll soon agree our engineers have delivered on that goal. User feedback is validating that when it comes to operation with Asterisk-based systems, including our own SwitchVox-based product, these are the easiest to use, best integrated, most interoperable products on the market today. The Digium family of phones will initially include 3 IP desk phones, uniquely designed to complement any Asterisk or SwitchVox-based solution. These phones are different for a number of reasons. First, they're exclusively designed for use with Asterisk. Secondly, we've made it really easy to auto-discover and provision the phones. Next, we've made it easy for the phones to access information inside of Asterisk, allowing tight coupling between an application and the phone. Additionally, we've created an applications engine that allows users and developers to create and run their own apps on the phone. And finally, we've done all of this at a very compelling price point. At Digium, we're always thinking of ways to give our customers the best value in business phone systems and also give them the power to create their own solutions for any communications challenge.
We'll continue to push the boundaries, not only to make Asterisk cooler, faster, and more technologically feature-rich, but to make Asterisk and VoIP communications even easier.
And together, we'll change the way the world communicates.
Again.
Cloud stacks are everywhere.
This is the way to better utilize all your resources, and it makes managing all your resources pretty easy.
All of the innovation is happening in open source. The collaborative nature and of the community and the speed at which these deficiencies, these bugs are getting discovered and fixed is a thing that really shows the power of the open source community.
It is global, and it's definitely because of the users.
Community people are extremely friendly and always ready to help.
If you go onto IRC any day, you'll see these guys helping each other out, and they're all doing it like in a selfless manner.
The product is transparent for everyone. Everyone can look at the code base. Everyone can see how Cloud Stack is being built. Nothing is proprietary. Everything is open.
In many ways, it's absolutely vital to the ongoing health of Cloud Stack.
The most exciting event in recent memory for me was our first developer boot camp. And our call gave people, I think, maybe 2 weeks notice to come attend. I was expecting 25 or 30 people. So we ended up with 87 people and had to go get more chairs into the room twice.
Everything within cloud computing is commodity and is open source. And so I don't think that you'll see anywhere where open source is not pervasive in cloud computing. And so I think it's an assumption. I think when you talk about cloud computing, you're really talking about open source cloud computing.
Cloud Stack is a robust solution for large deployments. You have dozens of data centers and thousands of servers in each data center. These hardware is going to fail, and CloudStack is designed to handle, number one, that mass scale. Number two, it's designed to handle the failure that inevitably happens in large deployments.
We started working on CloudStack over 4 years ago, and it was the original set of people working on it had a background of delivering software to telcos and service providers.
Lots of QA, lots of users actually using it.
High availability is the key feature. Multiple hypervisor support, different network models. You can pick up whatever suits you better.
CloudStack management server can be deployed in different physical machines.
It definitely has a huge footprint. It's being deployed everywhere.
There's a major movie studio that they were using CloudStack. They were using it to transcode video, and I thought that was terribly fascinating. What I found more fascinating is what they did during lunch, where they would spin up 50 or 60 game servers, and then as soon as lunch was over, they would destroy all the instances and go back to doing real work.
CloudStack is vast. It touches so many different aspects, and there's no one person that's kind of like a master of all those realms.
I think CloudStack as a project is going to be one of the leaders, simply because it's some of the most featureful and robust platforms out there.
I don't see any limits to the CloudStack.